You know how it is you really want to get a handle on something complex?
Mm.
Go deeper than just the surface level?
Mm-hmm. But then you're faced with this mountain of information, right? It can feel overwhelming.
Exactly, and that's what the deep dive is all about. We do the sifting for you, digging through the key sources,
Hmm.
the core stuff.
Yeah, pulling out those crucial insights, the real nuggets, so you get properly informed without, getting totally bogged down.
We want it to be efficient, but thorough. Makes sense of the noise.
See the patterns underneath it all.
So today, our deep dive is taking us into this really intense century. Massive global change. And right alongside it, the emergence of a new faith.
We're mainly looking through the lens of God Passes By, which offers this really specific take on that 100-year period.
A period marked by huge societal shifts and, the rise of the Bahá'í Faith.
And what's really interesting is how the sources connect these two things, the global chaos and this new religious movement.
It's not just saying they happened at the same time.
No, the analysis digs deeper, suggesting a real relationship between them.
Okay, so that's our mission today, trying to understand that connection. How did the global crises back then, as our sources frame them, tie into the birth and early growth of the Baha'i faith?
Right. Where do we start?
Let's kick things off with this idea of planetary upheaval. The book talks about right at the beginning. It sounds dramatic.
It is. The author basically argues that this whole era of intense unrest, described as dire planetary upheaval, isn't separate from, but actually linked to, the emergence of what's called Baha'u'llah's embryonic world order.
Wow, okay. So a direct link.
Okay.
The faith's beginnings tangled up with world crises.
That's the central claim, yeah. A really significant one.
And what evidence does the book give for this upheaval? What did it look like?
Well, it lists a whole catalog of signs, things like widespread destruction, terrible misery, fear, a fundamental derangement of the world's equilibrium.
Derangement of equilibrium. Strong words.
Definitely. And a sweeping revolution of mankind's ordered life. It paints this picture of a world really coming apart at the seams, or at least transforming violently.
And it wasn't just seen as random bad luck.
No, that's key. The source points to a spiritual catalyst. It talks about a world-shaking, world-energizing, world-redeeming spirit connected to the Báb, the herald of the faith, meaning the Jate.
So the Báb's influence is seen as a driver for this portentous crisis, a spiritual force causing ripples in the material world.
That's the interpretation offered, yes. That these big historical shifts had a spiritual underpinning.
The book is quite specific, too, listing these convulsions of contemporary society. What kind of things?
Yeah, it mentions frenzied, worldwide ebullitions of men's thoughts, fierce conflicts, race against race, creed against creed, class against class.
Sounds familiar, unfortunately.
It does. Also, the shipwreck of nations, kings being overthrown, empires breaking apart, dynasties ending, even the collapse of established religious hierarchies.
Like the entire structure of the world was cracking.
Exactly. And the source really emphasizes that these things got more and more intense, especially noting an acceleration after World War I broke out.
Okay, so if we tie this back to the main idea, the argument is these breakdowns weren't just random events.
Correct. The argument is they were deeply connected to the impact of Baha'u'llah's revelation, his teachings entering the world and how the world reacted. Often, with rejection.
So the chaos, from this viewpoint, is partly a consequence of this new spiritual energy meeting resistance.
That's the perspective presented, the world reacting, often painfully, to Baha'u'llah's call, a difficult but ultimately transformative process.
But the book also makes it clear that the faith's own early history wasn't exactly smooth sailing either. It faced huge challenges.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The source points out this cyclical pattern. In the first 100 years, you see these series of crises, internal and external, often really severe.
Followed
by periods of surprising growth and consolidation. It wasn't just a straight line upwards.
And interestingly, these crises weren't just roadblocks. The book says each one mysteriously released a corresponding measure of divine power. Like they fueled the next step.
That's a really crucial point in the narrative. This idea that adversity wasn't just overcome, it actually acted as a catalyst. It led to further unfolding, a deeper outpouring of what it calls celestial grace.
Like pressure building up and then releasing, leading to expansion.
Exactly. A dynamic relationship between hardship and empowerment.
Okay, let's dive into some of those early trials. The Báb's ministry, for instance. The book mentions his release from prison in Shiraz, but with a condition.
Right, he had to leave the city. And while that might seem like a positive step, it actually set him on a path towards even greater difficulties later on.
So he travels to Isfahan, September 1846. And this was a calmer period.
Relatively, yes. A brief window of tranquility, but also a time of really significant impact.
Yeah, the book talks about the spell he cast, people clamoring for his bathwater, even his host, a top cleric, waiting on him personally. That's remarkable influence.
It was extraordinary. The reverence he inspired initially was immense. The source even details him revealing a commentary on the Surrey of Val-Ora incredibly quickly, astonishing everyone who saw it.
But that level of admiration didn't sit well with everyone, did it? Opposition started brewing.
Sadly, no. The established religious scholars, the mujtahids and ulamas, they got increasingly worried. They started denouncing him as a heretic.
Things escalated quickly.
They did. They even issued a fatwa, a religious ruling, condemning him to death. And the Imam Jumhar, his initial host, was pressured into testifying against him.
Wow. So the authorities were caught in the middle, trying to manage his popularity against the establishment's pressure.
Precisely. The governor, Manuchir Khan, was in a really tight spot. He was supportive, it seems, but needed to handle the unrest.
So he came up with a plan.
Yeah, a clever one. He publicly announced that Báb was leaving for Iran, but secretly kept him safe in his own residence for about 4 months.
The book even mentions Manuchir Khan had big plans dedicating his wealth to the faith, wanting to convert the Shah, even arranging a marriage between his sister and the Báb. That shows real conviction.
It really highlights the powerful effect the Báb had on people, even powerful ones. But tragically, Manuchir Khan died suddenly.
An event the Báb had actually foretold.
Yes, according to the account. And his death removed that layer of protection, accelerating the crisis for the Báb.
Which led to another summons from the Shah, influenced by the deputy governor this time.
Right, Gurjin Khan, described as ruthless. He saw his chance after Manuchir Khan's death and persuaded the Shah to order the Báb brought to Iran, under escort, supposedly.
But they didn't actually make it to Iran, did they?
No, there was a last-minute change. Just outside the capital, an order came from the Grand Vizier, Haji Mirza Akwasi.
The Grand Vizier, why?
He saw the Báb as a major threat to his own power and the stability of the state as he saw it. He rerouted the escort to a place called Kulain. Then came a letter from the Shah himself, basically confirming the Grand Vizier's influence. It was on the Vizier's advice that the Shah ultimately decided to imprison the Báb.
Not in Iran, though.
No, in the remote fortress of Maku, way up in Azerbaijan, a distant, isolated place.
So a period of high influence, followed by rising opposition, brief protection, and then remote imprisonment. Dramatic shifts.
Very much so, and Maku was just the first stop on the path that eventually led to his martyrdom.
Before we get to that, the book highlights a really key moment during this time. The Báb's public declaration in Tabriz. This sounds like a turning point.
Oh, it absolutely was. There was this big meeting called in Tabriz officially to, put him on trial and stamp out his heresy.
But it backfired on them.
Completely, it turned into the Báb's biggest stage, the supreme opportunity for him to publicly forcefully state his claims.
And the audience was significant. The crown prince, top clergy, leaders of the Shaky school.
A very powerful assembly. And right there, in front of everyone, he didn't hold back. He declared, I am the promised one.
Wow.
And he asserted that everyone, East and West, owed him obedience. A direct challenge to the existing order. A moment of pure spiritual assertion.
Going back a bit earlier in his ministry, the book talks about the Qayyum al-Azma. This is presented as a really foundational text.
It is. Baha'u'lláh himself called it the first, the greatest, and mightiest book of the Bábí dispensation, revealed right near the start, in Shiraz.
And its main purpose.
According to the source, its fundamental aim was to foreshadow the immense sufferings that Baha'u'lláh, who's seen allegorically as the true Joseph in the text, would later endure.
It's a massive work, isn't it? Something like 9,000 verses?
Over 9,000, yeah. Across 111 chapters, each commenting on a verse from the Quranic story of Joseph. A truly monumental revelation.
And the themes it covered were broad.
Incredibly broad. It had direct warnings for kings and princes, predicted the downfall of the reigning Shah, Muhammad Shah.
Really specific.
Very. It commanded the Grand Vizier, Haji Mirza Akwasi, to abdicate, admonish the entire Muslim religious establishment, particularly the Shia clergy.
But it also looked forward.
Definitely. It praised the virtues of Baha'u'lláh, foretelling his coming, using titles like Remnant of God and Most Great Master.
So establishing the Bab's own station, but also pointing beyond himself.
Exactly. It proclaimed the Bábí revelation as an independent, universal faith. It even had a message for the people of the West.
What did it say of them?
It called on them to arise and help the cause of God. It also contained warnings of God's terrible vengeance and threatened the Islamic world with the most great fire for rejecting the new laws.
And it foreshadowed his own fate.
Yes, his martyrdom. It praised the future followers of Baha'u'lláh. The people of Baha predicted that some prominent early believers would fade away and warned of afflictive torment for those who usurped the rightful succession in Islam. It laid out the whole drama, really.
It's striking how central the idea of him whom God shall make manifest Baha'u'lláh was right from the beginning.
Absolutely central. The Bab spent so much energy preparing his followers for this next greater revelation. He told many disciples personally that they'd live to see his day.
The book gives examples, right? Like Mullah Bakir meeting him face to face.
Yes, and Sayyah getting a similar promise. He directed Mullah Fosin towards Turan, telling him a great mystery was there. He promised Qudus he would attain the presence of the one they adored.
It seems like he was constantly weaving this expectation into his interactions.
He was. He even gave specific titles related to believing in him whom God shall make manifest. And to Aim, in a later text, the Kitabi Panshan, he actually revealed Baha'u'llah's name and announced his imminent advent. The anticipation he built was immense.
And the Bab's own attitude towards this coming figure. The reverence seems profound.
Utterly profound. He's quoted saying, "I would be the first to adore him and the first to bow down before him." That says so much about their relative stations.
He really elevated Baha'u'lláh above himself.
Completely. He said none of his own words, nothing in his own scripture, the Bayan, could truly describe the promised one. He called himself just the first servant to believe in him.
There's that analogy about the germ.
Right. Comparing a tiny-year-old germ holding the full potential of Baha'u'llah's revelation as superior to the combined force of his own entire scripture, the Bayan, it's a powerful image.
Underscoring the sheer magnitude of what was coming.
Yes, and he used other metaphors too. The entire Bayan, just a leaf in Baha'u'llah's paradise. A single verse from Baha'u'lláh being greater than the whole Bayan on that day.
He saw his own revelation as the seed stage.
Exactly. The Bayan was the seed. Its ultimate perfection would only be seen when him whom God shall make manifest appeared. He said, "The Bayan deriveth all its glory from him whom God shall make manifest."
It's such a consistent theme. The ring analogy, too.
The Bayan like a ring on his hand, and he himself like a ring on Baha'u'llah's hand. His reverence was absolute. He told Vahid that even certitude itself would be ashamed to try and certify his truth.
And he warned Vatid about denial.
Sternly. Said he'd disown him if he denied the promised one, but that he'd cherish a believing Christian like the apple of my eye. It shows where the ultimate importance lay.
This constant pointing forward must have shaped the whole identity of the early Bábí community.
It absolutely did. It gave them this incredible sense of purpose and anticipation, even amidst all the danger, preparing the way.
But as we know, that danger was very real. The opposition was fierce. The book calls the clergy's reaction vituperation and calumny.
Yes, they saw the faith as profoundly threatening, a heresy undermining their authority. They actively worked to suppress it, stirring up hatred, condemning the Bábís publicly.
And they put pressure on the Shah.
They induced the Shah himself to summon the Báb to the capital, hoping to contain or eliminate his influence.
But the Báb's followers didn't just stay silent. The learned ones fought back intellectually.
No, they were very active. They wrote defenses, commentaries, refuted the slander point by point. They stressed their loyalty to Islam's foundations, to Muhammad and the Imams.
But reinterpreted things.
Exactly. They interpreted Islamic prophecies in ways that pointed to the Báb as the fulfillment, showing continuity.
And they used the example of Imam Hussein, the martyr.
Yes, strategically. They drew parallels, arguing that suffering and apparent defeat didn't invalidate truth, subtly linking their own persecution to a revered story in Shia Islam.
This whole period of tension, debate, and rising persecution really exploded after Muhammad Shah died, didn't it?
It did. His death in 1848 was a major turning point. It led to the fall of his powerful Grand Vizier, Haji Mirza Akwasi.
And the new Shah came to power.
Yes, Nasiruddin Mirza ascended the throne. And unfortunately for the Bábís, this brought a new figure to prominence, the Amir Niam Mirza Taqi Khan.
And he wasn't sympathetic.
Not at all. He quickly issued a decree demanding immediate harsh punishment for all Bábís. This kicked off a far more systematic campaign.
More organized than before.
Much more. It involved both government and religious authorities working together, fueled by ongoing slander from the clergy, and even financial incentives for capturing Bábís.
It sounds like a really dark chapter.
It was. The source calls it the first time the state and clergy were so completely unified against the faith. It foreshadowed the terrible suffering Baha'u'lláh would later face in the Siachal prison in Iran and his eventual exile.
A united front government, clergy, people turned against them.
That's how it's described. Scattered killings happened in rural areas. In larger gatherings, when Bábís tried to defend themselves, it was twisted.
Used as an excuse for more violence.
Exactly. It just inflamed hostility further, leading to major outbreaks and massacres. The book names Sheikh Abarsi, Nairiz, Zanjan, and even Iran itself as sites of these tragedies.
The story of Sheikh Abarsi sounds particularly harrowing, but also heroic.
It really is. The source emphasizes the incredible bravery, the discipline, the sheer resourcefulness of the Bábís besieged in that fort.
Contrasting it with their opponents.
Yes, highlighting the often cowardly or treacherous actions of the attackers against the noble conduct of the Bábís.
Mullah Hussein, the first believer, features prominently again. His restraint, his faith.
His nobility shines through. Refusing unnecessary violence, but utterly steadfast. Still sounding the call to prayer, the Adhan, even as his friends fell around him. Incredible conviction.
And this spirit of renunciation among the besieged, casting away valuables.
It's remarkable. They seemed completely detached from worldly things. Stories of people throwing away turquoise, silver, gold, refusing to touch the enemy's abandoned riches. Their focus was entirely elsewhere.
Do they try to negotiate or explain themselves?
Mullah Hussein certainly did. The book mentions his sincere appeals to the attacking prince, assuring him they weren't rebels, just defending themselves.
But figures on the other side, like Sayyidul Ulama, were actively fanning the flames.
He was a major instigator, yeah. Using religion to incite violence, it shows the intense fanaticism they were up against.
There are even stories of Mullah Hussein's almost superhuman strength in battle.
Yes, like the account of him supposedly cutting down an enemy hiding behind a tree with one blow. These stories became legendary, reflecting the immense courage shown.
And Baha'u'lláh visited the fort briefly. That must have been a huge boost.
A massive moment of inspiration. It brought great joy to Mullah Hussein. It's also linked to the deliverance of Qudus, another key figure who then played a major role.
Qudus provided spiritual strength.
Yes, his calm wisdom, his commentary on a mystical text. It helped sustain them.
Then there was the uprising in Nairiz. The book draws parallels with Abarsi.
Strong parallels, same pattern. Fearless Bábís, hostile clergy, fanaticism, aggression, heroism, the authorities coordinating.
But also treachery and massacre.
Yes, and the source suggests the massacre in Nairiz was perhaps even more revolting.
The fate of Vathid, a respected scholar, sounds particularly brutal.
Horrific. Dragged through the streets, beheaded, his head stuffed with straw, paraded as a trophy, his body desecrated. And then a general attack on all the Bábís, their property seized, houses destroyed, women and children captured and abused.
Even in the capital, Iran, there was bloodshed before the Báb's martyrdom. The 7 martyrs.
Yes, a smaller scale, but significant. 7 individuals from different walks of life. They all refused to recant their faith, even under the principle of taqi, concealing belief to save your life.
People tried to save them, offered ransoms. Even the Emir Niam pleaded with them.
All failed. They remained defiant. The accounts describe their ecstatic joy, their shouts of faith, reciting verses, appealing to the crowd, eager for martyrdom.
And their bodies were mistreated afterwards.
Yes, left unburied and subjected to further atrocities. It shows the sheer hatred directed at them.
So this period saw the loss of so many key early figures.
A devastating loss. Qudus, Mullah Hussein, Vathid, Hujat, the Báb's own uncle, half of the original letters of the living were martyred or about to be.
And Ahir was on that path too.
Yes, courageously moving towards her own martyrdom.
Amidst all this darkness, there's that incredible story about the Báb's execution attempt in Tabriz, his disappearance.
It's one of the most astonishing accounts. The first firing squad shoots, the smoke clears, and the Báb is gone.
Gone. Where?
Found back in his prison cell, unharmed, finishing a conversation he'd been interrupted from. The officer in charge was so shaken, he resigned on the spot.
Unbelievable. Let's talk more about Ahiri. She seems like such a powerhouse. Early activities spreading the faith.
Absolutely. She was brilliant and fearless. debating scholars, converting officials like the governor of Kermanshah. She even translated parts of the Qayyum-ul-Azma.
A real force in Qazvin.
Huge impact there. Known for her skill, her organizing, her sheer enthusiasm.
And her meeting with Va'id in Iran, in Baha'u'llah's house.
A pivotal moment. She really pushed him, urging him towards heroic action for the cause. She held meetings for women in Iran, drawing huge crowds, even disrupting a wedding because guests left to hear her speak.
Her confrontations with the authorities sealed her fate.
Yes, her 7 meetings with the Grand Vizier's officials. She just boldly affirmed the new revelation that led directly to her death sentence.
But she kept writing odes about her faith.
Beautiful, powerful odes affirming her belief in the Báb and, significantly, her recognition of Baha'u'llah's future station.
And her role at the Conference of Badasht.
Crucial. That conference was where the break with Islamic law, the revolutionary nature of the Báb's teachings, was made dramatically clear. Aheri was central to that.
And her final words at her martyrdom about women's emancipation.
Legendary. You can kill me as soon as you like, but you cannot stop the emancipation of women. So defiant, so forward-looking.
What about the persecutors? The book suggests they didn't fare well in the long run, a kind of divine chastisement.
That's the perspective presented. It recounts the downfall, disgrace, and often unpleasant deaths of key figures who led the persecution. Muhammad Shah, his vizier Ajib Mirza Aqasi, the Amir Niam Mirza Taqi Khan, another official Mirza Aqla Khan.
Implying a sort of historical justice?
Suggesting their actions had consequences, yes.
Okay, let's shift focus now to Baha'u'lláh himself. His early revelations, his exile to Iraq. The book mentions a powerful dream he had in prison.
Yes, in the Siachal, that terrible dungeon in Iran. He heard this incredibly sweet voice promising him victory through himself and his pen, telling him not to grieve and foretelling that helpers would arise for his cause.
A moment of profound reassurance in the darkest place.
Absolutely. And the book compares the impact of this divine summons on him to the experiences of Moses at the burning bush or Muhammad receiving revelation, a foundational spiritual event.
Baha'u'lláh himself described revelation flowing even in prison.
Yes, he spoke of the streams of revelation pouring over him despite the chains and the foul air.
But his exile to Iraq wasn't an immediate solution to all problems.
No, the source notes it was a slow process. The full potential of that period unfolded gradually, and it was marked by its own crises, both internal and external.
Internal crises, like discord among the Bábís themselves.
Yes. For instance, the contrast between someone like Mirza Qajan, who was deeply devoted to Baha'u'lláh, and the intense jealousy of Mirza Yahya, the Báb's appointed successor, and his associate, Sayyid Muhammad.
Mirza Yahya. He becomes a problematic figure.
Increasingly so. This jealousy and rivalry created significant tension. The revelation of the Tablet of Kuludam, a major theological work by Baha'u'lláh, actually highlighted these divisions.
During this period, Baha'u'lláh withdrew for a time to the mountains.
Yes, he spent 2 years in seclusion in the mountains of Suleymaniye in Kurdistan.
Why did he do that?
It seems it was partly due to the turmoil and intrigue within the Bábí community in Baghdad, particularly surrounding Mirza Yahya. It was a period of retreat and perhaps allowing things to unfold.
But he wasn't completely inactive. The story about the poet.
Right. A local poet challenged him, and Baha'u'lláh instantly composed a poem that far surpassed the poet's work, demonstrating his innate wisdom and eloquence even in seclusion.
And his reputation grew even while he was withdrawn.
It did, quietly. Scholars, Sufis, local leaders in Suleymaniye and nearby Kirkuk became aware of him. They were drawn to his discourses, his writings that solved complex questions.
People saw him as someone special.
Some considered him a holy man, a man of the unseen, maybe even a prophet. Kurds, Arabs, Persians, all kinds of people developed immense respect for him.
He later called this retirement a mighty testimony.
Yes, suggesting his withdrawal itself was a proof of his divine station. And Abdu'l-Bahá said Kurdistan became magnetized with his love, but outwardly he lived very simply in poverty.
Meanwhile, back in Baghdad, what was happening with Mirza Yahya while Baha'u'lláh was away?
Things went downhill fast. The community deteriorated, and Mirza Yahya, operating secretly, tried to undermine Baha'u'llah's influence.
How? What did he do?
The source accuses him of some very serious things, sending someone to murder Dayan, a prominent Bábí, trying to incite Mirza Qajan to assassinate the Shah, an act that would have brought disaster on everyone.
These sound like desperate measures.
They do. The book calls his actions, and those of Syed Muhammad, a most grievous betrayal of the Báb's trust. He's also accused of ordering the murder of the Báb's cousin, Mirza Ali Akbar.
It seems he was actively working against the spirit of the faith.
The accusations are severe, corrupting the Báb's texts, adding blasphemies to prayers, apathy towards the Báb's martyrdom, condemning loyal followers, and even an unspeakable violation against the Báb's honor. Syed Muhammad's bad behavior in Karbala added to the chaos.
A stark contrast to the early heroes like Mullah Fuay.
Absolutely. And this confusion led to others actually claiming they were the promised one themselves. The community was falling apart.
So when Baha'u'lláh returned to Baghdad,
He found the community in a terrible state. His own words, quoted in the book, are devastating. "We found no more than a handful of souls, faint and dispirited, nay, utterly lost and dead."
that must have been incredibly painful for him.
It was. He initially kept to himself, saddened by the situation.
But his influence eventually reasserted itself.
Gradually, yes. His inherent spiritual authority started to shine through again. People who'd met him in Sulaymaniyah came to Baghdad seeking him out.
And locals in Baghdad started recognizing him too.
Yes, prominent figures, important religious leaders like Ibn Yalusi came to him, debated, and were won over, becoming devoted followers. His prestige began to rise again.
Attracting all sorts. Poets, mystics, officials, even princes.
Exactly. People from all levels of society were drawn by his wisdom, his character, the power of his presence.
The book gives examples of how he transformed people's lives.
Yes, powerful anecdotes like the man who wouldn't eat until punished for a mistake, showing this incredible inner change, this desire for justice he inspired.
A real spiritual revival.
Nabil, the historian, described it that way. A tremendous fervor seized the community in Baghdad. Princes visiting his reception room felt like they were in paradise.
And the story of Nabil, the sacrifice? Syed Ismail.
An amazing example of devotion. Taking it upon himself to sweep the path where Baha'u'lláh walked, cherishing the dust, ultimately giving his life for his faith. It shows the depth of love he inspired.
During this Baghdad period, he revealed some major works. The Kitab-i Aqdas, the hidden words.
Foundational texts, yes. The Aqdas, the most holy book containing the core laws and principles called the Mother Book, aiming to unify religions.
And the hidden words.
Short, powerful, gem-like utterances, originally called the Hidden Book of Fahmi, revealed by the Tigris River, designed to reorient hearts and minds to essential spiritual truths.
Their opening lines capture that divine essence.
Beautifully, describing them as descending from the realm of glory, spoken by the tongue of power, clothed in brevity as a grace to humanity.
Then came his departure from Baghdad, another major shift. He spent time in a garden first.
Yes, 12 days in the Najibi garden just outside the city. It became a poignant time of farewells.
Many people came to see him off, even officials.
Friends, followers, but also prominent figures like the Mufti of Baghdad, Alusi again, and the governor himself, Namik Pasha, all expressing sorrow and respect.
Alusi criticized the Shah, and the governor offered help.
Yes, Alusi openly condemned the Shah's injustice. Namik Pasha expressed regret and offered any assistance he could for the journey.
And Baha'u'llah's request.
Simply asked the governor to treat his family and friends remaining behind with kindness.
Then the long journey began. 110 days to Samsun on the Black Sea.
A difficult journey, forming a caravan with his family and followers. But interestingly, along the way, officials and notables often greeted him with respect, even enthusiasm.
Despite being exiled.
Yes, it shows his growing stature was recognized even then.
Which brings us to Adrianople. In that critical period, Mirza Yahya's open rebellion and Baha'u'llah's public proclamation. The book calls this the most turbulent time.
Arguably, yes, even worse than previous hardships because this was internal betrayal. Mirza Yahya's actions are compared to history's worst betrayals.
It must have delighted their enemies and confused the followers.
Exactly. It caused immense pain and confusion. The source says Syed Muhammad was the main instigator behind Mirza Yahya.
Mirza Yahya himself remained hidden. Cowardly.
Yes, often in seclusion, afraid. He even traveled disguised among the exiles to Mosul.
And the list of his acts of infamy continued.
Corrupting texts, blasphemous additions to prayers, falsely claiming leadership, apathy about the Báb's fate, condemning the loyal mirrors, ordering more murders, the violation against the Báb's honor. It's a grim list.
Baha'u'lláh lamented this.
Deeply. Yet he still expressed forgiveness towards Yahya. But despite this sorrow, and the threat of being exiled yet again.
He chose this moment to proclaim his mission to the rulers of the world.
Yes, from Adrianople, he sent powerful tablets, letters to the kings and rulers east and west.
Who did he write to?
The popes, warning them, predicting the fall of papal temporal power. The kings of Christendom, criticizing them for not recognizing the spirit of truth.
And the Ottoman Sultan, and the Shah of Persia.
To Sultan Abdulaziz, urging justice, warning against bad ministers, describing his own suffering. To Nair-ud-din Shah, his longest letter, detailing his trials, affirming his innocence, describing his divine summons, and condemning violence.
Around this time, was there growing interest from the West? Queen Marie of Romania.
Some initial signs, yes. Pilgrims started arriving later. Queen Marie's pilgrimage was thwarted, though, but this growing awareness, combined with the internal conflict,
Attracted more negative attention from enemies, leading to the final banishment.
It seems so. It all culminated in the decree exiling him to the worst penal colony in the Ottoman Empire, Baka.
The most great prison. The journey there went via Gallipoli.
Yes, and in Gallipoli, he revealed the Syria Reis, another important tablet. Eyewitnesses described the immense sadness in Adrianople as he left.
He spoke of trusts left behind.
Yes. And interestingly, properties were bought near the Sea of Galilee around this time, intended for future Baha'i use.
And despite Akka being a prison, he later transformed it spiritually.
He described it as becoming the most exalted paradise through his presence. But physically, the conditions were initially horrific.
While he was in Akka, the persecution in Persia didn't stop.
No, if anything, it continued violently. The book mentions more incidents, like in Abadi and Takur. His followers there still faced intense suffering.
Did he continue writing to rulers from Akka?
Yes, including a notable tablet to Tsar Alexander II of Russia,
What was the message?
announcing the coming of the promised father himself and urging the Tsar to summon the nations to God, recalling the past help given by the Russian ambassador in Iran.
And during this time, he laid out core principles for world order.
Absolutely fundamental principles. Collective security between nations, reducing weapons, the need for a world gathering for peace.
And the importance of justice.
He exalted justice as the absolute foundation, the light of men, the basis for world order.
The book then connects the downfall of rulers like Sultan Abdulaziz and Napoleon III to his warnings.
It presents their falls from power as fulfillments of the prophecies and warnings in his tablets to them, consequences for ignoring his call to justice.
And a similar decline in the power of religious institutions.
Yes, it notes a weakening of the clergy in Persia and a gradual loss of authority among Christian, Jewish, and Zoroastrian leaders elsewhere happening concurrently.
Now, let's talk about Abdu'l-Bahá, Baha'u'llah's son, his unique station.
Baha'u'lláh gave him specific, unique titles. The Master, Sirullah, Mystery of God, Branch of Holiness, Limb of the Law of God. These clearly established his authority after Baha'u'lláh.
The center of the covenant, the perfect example.
Exactly. Baha'u'llah's own writings extolled his station, his perfect obedience, his vital role in guiding the faith.
Did Baha'u'lláh foresee challenges to Abdu'l-Bahá's leadership?
Yes, he warned about future opposition to him who shall come after me, meaning those who would challenge the covenant centered on Abdu'l-Bahá.
He mentioned Mirza Muhammad Ali specifically, his other son.
He stated clearly that Muhammad Ali would come to nothing if he strayed from the cause. And Abdu'l-Bahá later confirmed how strongly Baha'u'llah's writings condemned covenant breakers.
Despite these future troubles, the faith started building institutions. The first house of worship in Ishkabad, and efforts in Chicago.
Yes, the Mashriq-ul-Adkar in Ishkabad, Turkmenistan, was the very first one built. And around the same time, the Baha'is in Chicago started planning their temple, getting Abdu'l-Bahā's blessing in 1903.
They formed the Baha'i Temple Unity, bought land.
Yes, in 1909. And Baha'is from all over the world started contributing to that project on Lake Michigan.
Abdu'l-Bahá was also deeply involved with the shrine of the Báb on Mount Carmel. That had a complicated history.
Very complex. Getting the Báb's sacred remains, hidden for decades, safely to Mount Carmel and building the shrine was a huge undertaking, guided by Abdu'l-Bahá over many years.
Overcoming many obstacles.
Numerous obstacles. But it fulfilled Baha'u'llah's own vision for Carmel.
And the Báb's remains were finally interred there.
Yes, Abdu'l-Bahá announced the joyous news on Nowruz, the new year. The remains were placed in the shrine. And remarkably, this coincided with progress on the Chicago temple design. Baha'u'lláh had prophesied Carmel's future glory.
Then came Abdu'l-Bahá's famous travels to the West, a huge impact.
Immense. He traveled through Europe and North America, proclaiming the faith, explaining the unity of religions, meeting countless people.
Who did he meet?
So many prominent figures in England, Scotland, the U.S., Canada, academics, politicians, artists, social reformers, religious leaders. He left a profound impression everywhere he went.
The book includes memorable stories from those travels.
Yes, accounts of his talks in churches and synagogues, his meetings with thinkers, his incredible compassion for the poor and marginalized, the powerful effect he had on people.
Going back to the Ishquad Temple, what was it like?
A 9-sided building with a central dome surrounded by gardens. Importantly, it also had associated buildings for social services, a school, hospice, hospital, showing that link between worship and serving humanity.
As Abdu'l-Bahá got older, the book shares his thoughts on his life ending.
Yes, he spoke of his service being complete, his longing to rejoin Baha'u'lláh. He urged the believers to focus on God's word, not his person. His final prayers express a deep weariness and readiness for ascension.
His funeral was a major event in Haifa.
Huge. A massive, diverse procession up Mount Carmel. Representatives from all religions, government officials, people from every background, a testament to the universal love he inspired.
After his passing, the focus shifted to the administrative order he and Baha'u'lláh had established.
Yes, the system designed to guide the faith and protect its unity. It's unique, not modeled on any existing government.
Key features: the Guardian, the House of Justice.
Hereditary authority for the Guardian, Shoghi Effendi. Exclusive legislative power for the elected Universal House of Justice. Elected members representing the whole community, not just constituents, and democratic elections for local and national bodies.
So the first step was establishing these local and national assemblies.
Exactly. As soon as the blueprint was clear from Abdu'l-Bahá's will, Bahá started forming local spiritual assemblies everywhere. Then came the national spiritual assemblies, which elect the Universal House of Justice and coordinate national activities.
And the World Center in Haifa continued to develop.
Yes, especially after World War I under the British mandate. More freedom. Abdu'l-Bahá was interred there. Electricity installed. The Báb's shrine expanded. More land acquired. The terraces built.
It received official recognition. Exemptions.
Yes, the High Commissioner granted exemptions for the holy sites. Palestine branches of national assemblies were set up to manage them.
The design for the Chicago Temple is mentioned again. Its unique style.
Yes, architect H. Van Buren Megenigal described it as a temple of light, blending diverse inspirations, aiming for a luminous, unifying feel.
Did the faith gain more external recognition elsewhere? League of Nations, Egypt.
The League of Nations passed a resolution about the injustice regarding Baha'u'llah's house in Baghdad. In Egypt, Baha'is took steps to be recognized as an independent religion, codifying laws, handling their own marriages, divorces.
And reaching out to minority groups?
Yes, actively connecting with different races and groups, reflecting the core principle of unity.
The work of individuals like Martha Root is
Yeah.
highlighted.
Her service was incredible. Tireless travel, meeting Queen Marie, lecturing, publishing, meeting world leaders. She did so much to spread the message globally.
The book also remembers early Western Baha'is who passed away.
Yes, acknowledging their crucial role, their sacrifices, in establishing the faith in the West.
So the book concludes by summarizing that first century.
Right. From the Báb's declaration and martyrdom, through Baha'u'llah's revelation and exile, to Abdu'l-Bahá establishing the administrative order. It stresses the faith's emergence despite relentless persecution and internal tests.
Acknowledging ongoing challenges too, like in Egypt, Baghdad, Russia.
Yes. And emphasizing the Bahá'í response, always asserting their independence as a distinct religion, implementing their laws, and seeking official recognition.
Okay, so let's bring it all together. This deep dive, primarily through God Passes By, really paints this picture of a deep, almost symbiotic link between global chaos and the rise of the Bahá'í faith.
Absolutely. The source argues compellingly that the massive crises of that era weren't just a backdrop, but were somehow intertwined with the spiritual energy released by the Báb and Baha'u'lláh.
And the faith's own history mirrors this intense trials, met with incredible resilience and growth.
Driven by the power of the message, and the sheer devotion of those early believers. It's quite a story.
It definitely makes you think, doesn't it? How new movements, new ways of thinking often emerge right when the world seems most in crisis. Are there lessons there for us today, facing our own global challenges?
That's the provocative thought, I suppose. What can we learn from this history of resilience, this vision of unity born amidst upheaval, as we navigate our own complex times? It's worth mulling over.
Definitely food for thought. We encourage everyone listening to explore the sources further, dig into this history for themselves.
There's so much more there. A truly fascinating period.